like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone.
Follow your dream, though it lead to worlds unknown. Life's but a shadow, once our dreams have flown. What if men cry, your dream is not our own? Your soul knows the answer. Go on alone. Give life your heart, bless everything that's grown. Fear not the loving, all this world's your own. Make rich the soil, but once the seed is sown, seek freedom, don't linger. Go on alone. Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone. Go on alone. Go on alone. Life is a dream, time like a stream carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere. Love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Though green summer fade and winter draw near, my Lord, in your presence I live without fear. Through tempest, through touch of your hand is my strength and my guide. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. The dancers will pass, the singing must end. I welcome the darkness with you for my friend.
Devi and I will both speak for a little while and then, not very long, but then we have a brief clip of Swamiji talking, and then we'll meditate, and at 8:30 we'll begin the Om Guru chanting, which we're going to do, as you know, for 24 hours all around the world, which is a very beautiful way to, one might say, end this glorious day. So, as we all know, this is the day that Swamiji met Master and was accepted as his disciple, and then also accepted as a monk into the order that Master had founded and moved to Mount Washington. But if you think about that, that was quite a whirlwind thing. So let's go back and bring ourselves in memory or in fantasy back to 1948. So about a week ago, Swamiji found and read Autobiography of a Yogi. Only a week ago. He was, by that time, searching. He had been searching for truth all of his life. By that time, according to him, he had grown desperate. And that desperation to find truth, because no matter where he turned, and he turned basically everywhere except toward God, but wherever he turned, he found a dead-end street, and he didn't know what to do, where to go, how to proceed. And in that, one might say, final desperation, he was led, as we all know, essentially by the power of the Guru, forcing him, even against his will, to go back and buy the book in the bookstore, Doubleday Durand in New York, and read that book, and of course booked the next possible bus, came across country, and then met Master. Now, to have gone through that in 1 week, be accepted, and then by this evening he was living at Mount Washington. That is not a normal entry process. And obviously, Swamiji's life was one of destiny. These great movements and the great souls who help, one might say, manifest God's will on earth, those things don't happen by chance. So Swami was destined to come destined to read that book, destined to come to Mount Washington to be accepted. But, his mindset had to be such. Devi this morning in her beautiful talk mentioned that Swami said that in the early years, even when he was there, Mount Washington was like a revolving door. Swami said at other times, many people didn't last 2 weeks at Mount Washington, didn't last for 2 weeks in that intense. Wasn't because the life was so hard, wasn't anything except that, as Swamiji said, Master held up a flawless mirror that reflected back only your higher self. And that reflection back of your higher self, you'd better be ready to live up to that. Because if you're not, if the storms of desires are raging too strongly in the lower 3 chakras or any of the lower 3 chakras of possession, pleasure, or power, if those desires are still too strong and you come into that dynamo of purity and energy, it either attracts you or it repels you. And Swamiji, of course, it attracted. Thank goodness. Otherwise, none of us would be here. Ananda wouldn't exist. So Swamiji had that whirlwind courtship and then was accepted. I won't go into his life as a monk because what we know of that is only through Swami's writings. None of us were there. His writings and, of course, the wonderful movie, The Answer. We know about that part. But then Master, during that time, empowered Swamiji, but in a very particular way, because Swamiji was, one might say, uniquely ready to be empowered to take these teachings out worldwide. He had that desire coming on the bus to find God and to share these wonderful teachings with everyone. He recounted also that one of the monks, Master mentioned to him, it might even have been Rajasi, I'm not sure, a little unclear of the person, but Master said, if only Walter had come earlier, we could have taken this teaching out so widely. Well, Walter didn't come earlier, and partly he didn't come earlier because he needed to be around for all of us. If he had been there in the early years, his mission, his life's purpose would have been largely already fulfilled, and we wouldn't be the beneficiaries of that. So as I say, these things all have a divine purpose and a divine will behind them. But Swamiji's life had a certain kind of an arc to it. First of all, it was always about discipleship. That was the only thing that motivated him. The desire to know God, the desire to serve his Master's work, those existed even before he met Master and were greatly, greatly empowered by him. And so that life of Swami, especially post-Master, and most especially for us, post the SRF period, when he was out on his own and beginning his public work on his own, that period after, at the beginning of that to the end of his life had a certain arc to it. I was fortunate enough to meet him just a few years, probably 4 or 5 years at the most, after he began his public work again, after he began lecturing and teaching. And before that, it was kind of just getting started. So I was fortunate. I'm sure I was, in a certain sense, destined to come to him at that time. But that life like Master's, Master came to this country and he had that period of about 10 or 15 years of intense energy and willpower and lecturing. He had to magnetize a whole country, and he went out on tour after tour after tour, and he would give, he would be in a town, in a city for a month or 6 weeks, and he'd give 2 and sometimes 3 classes a day and free lectures and meetings, and it was enormous flow of energy. Well, Swami was much like that. He was a dynamo of willpower in the beginning. He was lecturing, he was traveling, he was writing. He found this property, or the meditation retreat, but he found the property here. By the time I came, that was purchased. We were traveling back and forth almost every weekend or every possible time that we had in order to begin the first buildings. But in the midst of all of that, Swamiji was writing constantly, teaching constantly. He was working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and not just kind of piddling around. He was really doing it. And that went on for a period of time. So he too, like Master, he had to magnetize, as Devi described us, this ragtag bunch that he drew. He had to magnetize because Master gave him the responsibility to write, to teach, and to edit. And Swami said that he also knew that Master empowered him to start communities. And so that was Swami's mission. That was what he was doing. And he did it way beyond what we could even begin to think of as the normal production of a human being. I mean, who writes 150 books? And good books. Not just some of the stuff you can find, but 150 books with deep, deep teachings, and all of the music. And Lord knows how many talks he gave, certainly in the thousands. And just that enormous flow of energy. Well, his life had a certain arc. Founding communities was part of that. And then toward the latter part of his life, a kind of different bhav came in, because he had largely by then accomplished what Master had told him to do. And so toward the latter part of his life, I would say certainly the last 10 years, but even a little before that, he began changing the style of lecturing that he did. But it wasn't just a change of style of lecturing. Before, if you listen to the wonderful talks on treasures, and thank you, Krishna, for doing those and putting so much loving energy into that, so that everybody who wants to can hear Swamiji. And in the early years, his lectures were absolutely mind-bogglingly brilliant. He would start in a direction on a subject, and then he would veer off, and you'd wonder, where in the world is he going? And then there would be threads off of that, and then pretty soon that would start to weave back into the main. And he wove this by the end of the lecture, this incredible tapestry that had deep yogic teachings and Vedantic truths and science and art and literature and Greek mythology, and it was all woven together into one mind-boggling, seamless whole. And he lectured like that for a long time. But gradually his lectures became, one might say, deeper in the sense that he didn't bring in so many other threads, just a little bit to shine a light. The main thing was he was now giving master's teachings. And then even that changed in the, I would say, the last 10 years or so. He began a different style of lecturing, and all he wanted to do was talk about Master. All he wanted to do was rest in his discipleship. And he couldn't even get through a lecture, get through a story without tears welling up. And his satsangs became, I don't know, so amazingly, it was like glimpsing the infinite in the disciple-guru relationship, glimpsing that through an absolutely clear glass window. And toward the end of his life, he was still putting out enormous energy. And still, I mean, as Devi said this morning, he went to India at the age of 77 to start a whole new continent of work there. And look what's blossomed from that. It's quite amazing. But as I say, that latter part, he was just now resting almost entirely in his discipleship to Master. He was just, even his outreach in India on television. What did he choose? He could have chosen any number of things to talk about. What book did he choose? He chose Conversations with Yogananda, because he would read a little conversation and then he would just talk about his time. So he did daily talks for a year on just talking about his guru. And then he wrote what might be his magnum opus, certainly one of them, which was Essence of the Bhagavad Gita. You all know the story of that. But for years, he had wanted to write that book. But he didn't have access to Master's source material. And so he wanted to know, how in the world could I write that book? And he had a dream, very significant dream, and Master came to him and said, "Don't forget the skylight." And Swami didn't know what the dream meant, but later on he realized what it meant. The skylight was Master's grace coming down, Master's presence. And Swamiji wrote that book faster than he wrote anything else of that depth and that size. He wrote it day after day, churned out 10 pages. Devi and I were fortunate to be there with him during that time. And so, but he was just living in the memory of Master, living in his teachings, living in hearing his voice, explaining these things and remembering, sometimes almost word for word, what he had heard 50 years earlier, 45 years earlier. And it was amazing. But he was so filled with joy during that process. And that last period of his life became guru, joy, and most especially love. He became so soft and so loving in those last years. He just, Everybody was his friend. Everybody he cared about. His very last, well, before his very last week, you've heard a couple of the stories, but one of his very last trips from Italy, he came back to India, and by then travel was very hard on him and his body was sore. And they brought a young man who gave massages, and he gave Swami massage, but he did it on the bed, relatively low bed, and had to bend over to do it. And Swamiji said, "Why don't you use a massage table? It would be so much easier for you." And the young man said, "Oh, sir, I don't have one." And Swami said, "Well, can't you get one?" He said, "Oh, sir, they're much too expensive. I have a wife and 2 young children, and this is a second job. I work a job, and then I also do this massage." Swami had never met this young man before. He said, "Well, I'll buy you a massage table. Find out what the cost is and let me know, and I'll pay for one." And so the young man found, he came back and he said, "Oh, sir, they're much too expensive." I can't remember the figure, but it was probably $1,000, which in Indian terms, was an enormous amount. And Swami said, "Go ahead and get it. I'm happy to buy it for you." Well, that in and of itself is a lovely, generous, beautiful story. But there's another part to that. And that's that when that young man was leaving, he told either Leela or Narayani or both of them, he said, he was just weeping. And he said, "I lost my parents when I was very young. I grew up as an orphan on the streets. And I've had to work very hard to get to where I am now, where I can support a family." Said, "But what I've always been missing, always been a hole in my heart, is I've never known the love of a father. And today, I found that love." And so that's what Swami became at the end, just an expression of love and kindness. And it all stemmed back to love that he had for his guru. As we know with the teachings, when we love God, God is through that, is able to pour his love back into us and through us to help others. And toward the end of his life, Swami just became a radiant, transparent, lucid vehicle for the love and kindness of Master and of Divine Mother. And we are all blessed beyond expectancy of imagination to have been part of that great drama. Thank you, Swamiji.
I'll say a few words, and then we'll watch a brief video of Swamiji talking about his relationship with Master, one that was filmed at Crystal Hermitage. It's very beautiful. But I thought what I'd like to do is kind of share little excerpts of passages that Swami wrote about Master and talk about them. And these I found all in the book, Religion in the New Age, Essays for Spiritual Seekers. This is from the preface. First he goes on to say how he traveled, the story that Jyotish told, how he traveled across the country and knelt at Master's feet and said, "I want to be your disciple." He goes on to write, "I have been his devoted disciple ever since that day, September 12th, 1948, at the present date, nearly 60 years ago." So he wrote this 13 years ago. It has been the greatest blessing of my life. I live only to serve him and his mission. And for that reason alone have I done all the work some people marvel at, the teaching, the books, the music, the number of communities I founded. It's very important for those of us who live at Ananda Village or any of our communities to understand that these communities, they're so multifaceted. Yes, there's simple living, high thinking in the country, beautiful nature, natural agriculture, all of these things. But that's what they are an act of Swami's discipleship. And we need to appreciate that, because otherwise it could be, we will lose the real thrust. I saw the headline of an article, I didn't read it, but it said, the last of California's hippie communes dies. Well, when Ananda was started, 1969, that was the heyday of hippie communes in California. And at first, it didn't look that much different on the outside. We had teepees, we had, long hair, all those things. But that's why we have to remember then and now, this community is an expression of Swami's discipleship. And it is our honor and privilege to live here. And it's our responsibility to carry on this community and all the aspects of it in the spirit with which it was founded. So it's really thrilling to think about that. And I think we do it instinctively. I see it everywhere. I go into Master's Market and I feel everyone there is doing it as an act of service to God and to their fellow Gurubhais. But let's always, for the work to evolve, and in a certain sense, it's just beginning. I think during this period of world transformation, these communities and the movement of deep, sincere relationship with God through discipleship, this is going to be what carries humanity forward out of the darkness, out of these chaotic times. And so let's continue to see the community, breathe the air of it, and say this was an act of discipleship. I remember the very first day I set foot on this property, July 4th, 1969, I too had taken a bus from not the East Coast, but from the Midwest, from Wisconsin, out to California, and then took a bus then from San Jose or Santa Cruz to Grass Valley, and somebody I didn't know picked me up, and there I was with my backpack and my sleeping bag and a little suitcase, and I was just standing there, not knowing what next. And then I felt this, like it was a wind behind me. That's what it felt like. It wasn't, I don't think, a physical wind, but it was a movement of energy. And I turned around, there was this man walking by me. I didn't know who he was, I'm sorry to admit, but he just moved by me. And somebody said, that's Swami Kriyananda. And I just felt this momentum. Something is going to happen here. I have no idea what, but I think this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. But just let's never forget that. It's so easy to get caught up in this committee and that council and this and that and the other. Just details, friends. What the real essence of every aspect of it is expression of discipleship. Whether it's singing or gardening, taking care of our elderly, whatever it is, it's an act of discipleship. And then Swami goes on to write. This is in the beautiful essay, Why I Love My Guru. He was infinitely kind to us, forgiving, supportive, gentle, humorous, one with us in friendship, and ever completely loving. Yet, he was also careful always to turn our minds and aspirations toward our own highest potential in God. Never did I see him come down from that high purpose, and always in his calm gaze, I saw a complete absence of ego motive, including the slightest impulse, either to act or react personally. Amazing, amazing to have seen that, to have appreciated it. How many people, saw Master and thought, oh, interesting, charming, magnetic human being. But to see, as they say, it takes one to know one. For Swami to see there was no ego principle there in any of his actions, and how that began aligning his personality, his consciousness, I should say, and how then everything, how everything that he did was molded by the model of Master. The books, the music, the communities, none of it came from the ego principle. Once a man was visiting Ananda, a saint from India, or a highly respected spiritual teacher. I don't know that he really was a saint. And we were showing him around, and he said, Swami was in India at the time, he said, how could Swami Kriyananda do all this? And then he paused and he said, oh, I understand. He didn't do it. God did it. And yeah, that's how Swami was able to do it, because there wasn't the thought, I am in charge, I am doing it, I have to form this. And in fact, we were sharing this morning at Sunday service, it was almost to an extreme where he just let people do what they were going to do. And he said once, Dharmadas told us this, Swami said to him, in building Ananda, for me I had a vision of what it was supposed to be, but it was 90% compromise, because I knew people had to put their own energy into it. I mean, that's amazing, that he could give everyone the freedom to play out their little parts, make their mistakes, whatever it might be. But he knew people are more important than things, and he lived it. My goodness, did he live it. And he so often just let us, I remember so many little incidents where he would say, well, should we do this or that? And I would say, oh, let's do this. And he'd look at me, and I knew that's not what he wanted me to say. Okay, let's do that. Yeah, that's But if I would have insisted, I think he would have gone along with it, because he wanted me to learn by my own mistake. And you've heard us say this, but it was one of the biggest corrections he ever gave to Jyotish and me. There was people wanting to start a project, and Swami asked us what we thought, and we said, well, Swami, others have tried it and hasn't succeeded, so I don't think we should try it. And Swami was very strong, and he said, maybe you know that from your own experience, but if they don't know it, and if you short-circuit their learning process, they won't grow. He didn't care about the failure. He wanted everyone's growth. And again, to just have that unconditional love and friendship for everyone and support. Really, Ananda is about supporting the individual's growth to God. Nothing more, nothing less. And my friends, if you're expecting something else, you're going to be disappointed, because that's really all it is. There was a person who was in charge of a department. I won't say the name, they're no longer here. But they wanted to promote Swami and make him popular. And Swami went along with it, but he knew it wasn't his destiny. And in the end, the person just was so frustrated because he couldn't make Swami well known. And I think if he had been doing it with a pure motive, Swami might have given it more energy, but it wasn't. It was like, I'm going to prove that we can make him famous. And Swami let him play it out. It didn't go anywhere, and then the person left. But again, if you're expecting any kind of fulfillment or accomplishment on a worldly level, it's not going to work. God doesn't want that for us. The totality of it works, but not the little parts. And then Swami writes, going on, when I met him, he said to me, I give you my unconditional love. No treasure could be greater, surely, than that sacred promise. He has fulfilled it in countless ways. More and more through the years, I have found him mentally guiding me, leading me toward final inner freedom, filling me with inner bliss. And this, of course, was written after Master passed. And I want us all to remember that Swami's not in the body anymore, but he still can guide us, maybe more than ever. We never knew Master in the physical body. In this lifetime, I think we have before. In fact, one time, Swami was hosting another spiritual leader. His name was Yogi Bhajan. And it was a big Indian meal up at the meditation retreat. And I was serving their table. And so I was clearing the plates and bringing new dishes on and so forth from behind. And I heard Swami say to Yogi Bhajan, and I think he was saying it for me, not for Yogi Bhajan, but he said, look at all these young people. They're so devoted. You know they had to be with Master in other lifetimes, or Yogananda in other lifetimes. And I was behind and I heard that. I was so thrilled. But it's true. We have been with him. We wouldn't be first generation doing this work if we hadn't and given our whole lives to it. But so don't think that we missed out, or we are missing out that Swami's no longer here, that Master's not with us. Like Swami said, and we saw it as Jyotish was describing so much at the end of his life. I don't think he thought about anything but Master. We'd be walking with him and he would be very abstract, and then he would say, oh, that's what he meant. What, Swamiji? Oh, something Master said, 40 years ago, and he just was always in communion with him. And you know what? We should be too. We should have in the back of our minds, in the depths of our heart, always a beautiful song. I love you, Master. I love you, Swami. Guide me. I'm confused. I don't know what my next step is. I don't know how to help this person that's coming to me for help. Sing to me your song. And so, again, Swami's modeling for us how to make it not the past, and not even the present, but beyond the past and present or future, the eternal now of the relationship of the disciple with the Guru. And Swami lived it, and increasingly, apparently, as his life moved on. And then the last little segment I wanted to read, I love my Guru, as he himself wrote about his own Guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar, as the spoken voice of silent God. He was ever, and now more than ever, my nearest, dearest companion. If I am right, I feel his inner smile. If I am wrong, I feel his inner encouragement to do better. He is on my side in every struggle against delusion. Could anyone be a better, truer friend than that? And that's the end of his little essay, Why I Love My Guru. So the greatest gift that Swami has given us, amongst a treasure trove of wonderful gifts, books and music, communities, teachings, friendships, global friendships. But the greatest gift is the example of his discipleship. And I hope we can take this day as an impetus in our own lives to go ever deeper in our own discipleship, to go to bed each night thinking of our Guru, to wake up each morning thinking of our Guru, to think of him when we talk with our friends, when we serve, when we cook, when we clean, when we garden, whatever it might be. Just always, always, as Swami was, listen to that silent voice of God, of the Guru whispering in your ear. And I believe the day will come at the end of our lives when we're all joined together in the astral world with Swamiji, celebrating life's well lived, life's given to Guru, and kind of rubbing our hands and saying, "What next, Swami? What next?" I look forward to that day. God bless you. So now we'll have a video of Swamiji.
Can you talk a little bit about what training was like in those early days?
With Yogananda, it was a very personal thing. He didn't have rules. It was much more the individual disciple. His way of leading people was if they opened up and were ready to take what he had to give, he'd give it. If he tried and they didn't take it, he didn't give. And so I found that, well, there was a special relationship I had with him. Whenever there was a group of us, he was always talking directly to me. And I had been with him less than a year when he put me in charge of all the monks. But even then, his training was never do this, do that, do the other. He depended on our inner attunement. The more we were in tune, the more we would give. But usually it would mean, and this is in fact the meaning of the Guru. The Guru, there are Gurus in India who don't speak, they're monis, perpetual silence. How can they be Gurus? I read something in the Times of India to the effect that nowadays who needs Gurus? We've got bookshops, we've got libraries, we can read all sorts of books. That's not what the Guru is. The real teaching of the Guru is his training of your consciousness. It says in the Bible, as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God. And that power that is transferred from the Guru to the disciple, this depends on the disciple's openness too. But the more open you are, the more you can receive. And so, whereas Yogananda in public would talk a lot about techniques and methods and attitudes and so on, to us he stressed again and again the importance of be in tune. Through that attunement you receive a certain understanding that comes from within. I remember one occasion when he was talking to some of the monks about potholes that had to be put in the road on the driveway there to because of the heavy rains down there. And I wasn't involved in that work, so I was just sitting there meditating, and I felt, even while he was talking about such a mundane thing as filling in potholes, I felt this bliss overwhelming me. And I realized that was his real teaching. His teaching was from inside also. I mean in this way, that he knew every thought I think. He does now. But many times if I had a thought that needed correction, and I didn't have any wrong thoughts, but I might have, all his teaching of me particularly was for how to help other people. And one time, for example, we were at a bar mitzvah and I was to demonstrate the yoga asanas, the postures, in Beverly Hills. And all of the people there were Jewish. Bar mitzvah is a Jewish ceremony. And they were all psychiatrists and that kind of very skeptical people. There's nothing more atheistical than a Jewish psychiatrist, as far as I know. That's cavalier statement, which I won't back up with any facts. But I got into a discussion with one of these men, and he was a complete atheist and just trying to tease me about my belief in yoga and all this changing your conscious stuff. And so I, to try to convince him, told him a few things that I had witnessed of my guru's miracles and so on. And I could see him sort of thinking, well, let's see, at 10 o'clock on Wednesday, I could see this patient. In other words, he thought I was crazy. Well, I was Master had me demonstrate the yoga postures for guests when he had them. And a couple of days later, I was with him, and I served him lunch with his guests and did some yoga postures. And after they left, he sat at the table with me. I sat with him, rather. And he said, by the way, when you're with skeptical, atheistical people, don't talk about miracles. I said, you knew? He said, I know every thought you think. And he proved it to me, because many times he would relate to me in such a way that maybe other people at present wouldn't know, but I would know. For instance, I used to pray to him, help me, teach me to love you as much as you love me. And he looked at me and said, how can a little cup hold the whole ocean? Well, only I could understand that, but it related exactly to what I'd been doing. And again he showed that he knew my thoughts. He was working from inside me, not outside. And that is the true relationship of the disciple to the guru, that the guru works on you. You are his clay, you might say, and he molds you. And you just find yourself changing in his company so that your old tendencies fall away and finally cease to even be things you remember well.